Hey gang, and welcome back. This week we're going to run down my top 10 EDH black sorcery spells. To start us off, I am not going to include Cruel Tutor, Grim Tutor, or Imperial Seal. My reasoning for this is that they're incredibly expensive, and frankly, Imperial Seal and Cruel Tutor are basically just slower versions of Vampiric Tutor. And basically, if I included these three in the top 10, the list would be only tutors. Well, not really only, but there'd be a lot of them on the list. My honorable mentions on this list include Dread Return, which is a fantastic way to recur creatures from your graveyard, plus it has an additional use from flashback. Buried Alive, which is a great card for any graveyard-based decks where you want to get creatures into your bin. And Read the Bones, which for 3 mana offers a ton of digging. So with my exclusions and honorable mentions taken care of, let's get into my list. Number 10, Bubbling Muck. For only 1 mana, we can essentially high tide our swamps, and generate frankly an absurd amount of mana to be able to tutor, drain, kill, cast, or whatever we need to do. I've really enjoyed this card since I found it, and it's an auto-include in almost any mono black deck I can think of. Sure, it gives our opponents the option of being able to tap their swamps for double black mana that turn, but that's usually not enough of a reason to stop us from running it. What's even better is that the card itself does not have to be a swamp, so that means that shock lands, or if you have Urborg Tome of Yawgmoth on the field, all of your lands are going to be able to tap for 2. Number 9, Living Death. I've ranked Living Death a little bit lower in this list, as unfortunately, in addition to bringing back your creatures, your opponent's also getting the benefit. Still, it's all about weighing the odds, and chances are if you're going to be running this card, your deck is going to be using your graveyard to bring creatures back anyway. It also has the potential to be a board wipe if your opponents don't have very many creatures in their graveyard, but a huge board. I would rank Living Death higher on this list were it not for the fact that the opponents get the creatures back. Unfortunately, due to this clause, it can cause too many things to go wrong for us when we cast this spell. Number 8, Rise of the Dark Realms. Yes, I consider Rise of the Dark Realms better than Living Death, mainly because your chances of winning the game if you resolve this spell are much higher than Living Death, which has the unfortunate side effect of bringing opponents' creatures back. Rise of the Dark Realms does the same thing, but thankfully we get them instead of your opponents. Sure, this spell costs 4 colorless more than its counterpart Living Death, but chances are you're going to have a ton of ways to generate black mana, like if you're using, say, Bubbling Muck or any of the mana delvers that black seems to have an abundance of, and yeah, you'll probably cast it a lot earlier than turn 9. Number 7. Exsanguinate. Exsanguinate is probably the poster child for mono black finishers in EDH, as its power level is through the roof for only 2 black mana and X. At its core, it's a drain spell, so unfortunately you're not able to redirect the damage to planeswalkers, but frankly, why would you want to? Oftentimes this spell is cast when you have an abundance of black mana, and you're able to essentially drain out the table and kill everyone, if not take them very low. Unfortunately, it's such a good card that almost every single black deck will run it, and even some dual colored decks, provided they have black in their color identity. Number 6, Reanimate. As Magic is a game about managing your resources properly, and life being one of your resources, having 40 life at the start of the game is something we can use early on to get huge advantage. Reanimate does this extremely well for only 1 black mana, being able to bring back any creature from any graveyard at the cost of 1 black and a bit of life. There are even some magical Christmas combos involving a Swamp, Dark Ritual, Entomb, Reanimate, and a huge creature like Jin-Gitaxias, which frankly wouldn't exist were it not for the fact that Reanimate was a card. Sure, compared to some of its larger Reanimator counterparts earlier on my list, it doesn't bring back an entire board, but for 1 black mana and a bit of life, you're able to steal a critical creature and hopefully win yourself the game. Number 5. Black Sun Zenith. Black sorceries and board wipes go together like peanut butter and jelly, so it's no surprise that some of the cards on my list are going to be board wipes. Black Sun Zenith does a great job of wiping the board, and does a fantastic impression of redundancy as it shuffles itself back into your library. It's an incredibly versatile board wipe, as not only does it shuffle itself back in, it also puts -1/-1 counters based on X, where X is how much you pay, onto all creatures on the board. This means it does a great job of getting rid of indestructible and persist creatures. The downside of this spell is the fact that not only does it get randomly shuffled back into your library, meaning you're not necessarily always going to draw into it again, but it also has an X in its spell cost, meaning you have to invest a lot of mana to take out large creatures. This card is still good enough to run in most EDH decks, and you'll probably want to run it as your 2nd or 3rd board wipe. Number 4. Damnation. Speaking of 2nd and 3rd board wipes, there's going to be a lot of them on this list in the top spots. Damnation is a fantastic card, and it does a great job of replicating, in fact, being an exact copy of Wrath of God, but in mono black. Unlike Black Sun Zenith, you only have to pay 4 mana to destroy all creatures and not allow them to regenerate, which is frankly a very reasonable amount of mana for what you get. It's also become one of those iconic Magic cards, having taken nearly a decade to see a reprint. Sure, it doesn't deal with indestructible creatures, but at 4 mana it deals with a heck of a lot. Number 3. Toxic Deluge. I promise you guys this is the last board wipe on this list. Hitting boards back in 2013 thanks to its initial printing in Commander 2013, Toxic Deluge has done some great work shaking things up in a lot of formats. It even sees play in Legacy, which values cost-effective spells capable of dealing with many threats. For only 3 mana and as much life as you want to pay into it, we're able to wipe the board, giving all creatures -X/-X, where X is the amount of life you paid. As I mentioned earlier with Reanimate, life is a resource, and chances are if you have to pay 6 life to kill a board full of creatures, you're going to save yourself that much more, having not had all those creatures smash into you during their combat steps. Cheap, efficient, and dealing with almost every single way of saving creatures, Toxic Deluge is probably my number 1 board wipe in black. Number 2. Demonic Tutor. I mean, you guys must have seen this coming a mile away. For only 1 colorless and 1 black, Demonic Tutor is a second copy of any card in your deck that you need. In a format where you're only able to run 1 copy of the spell, barring things like Shadowborn Apostle and Relentless Rats, provided you have it in your hand, Demonic Tutor might as well read as any card you have, but with an additional cost of 1 colorless and 1 black. What I would consider another one of the flagship cards, Demonic Tutor is so powerful that it's banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage, so that's gotta give you an idea of how good it is in EDH. But if it's that good, you guys must be asking, what is my number 1 spot? Well, number 1. Yawgmoth's Will. The only sorcery speed black card that I think could beat out Demonic Tutor in terms of power is Yawgmoth's Will, granting every card in our graveyard flashback, regardless of its color identity or whether or not it had flashback to begin with. Yawgmoth's Will is an incredibly powerful card. It is a staple in any EDH Storm or Doomsday deck, and can frankly provide even just a normal EDH deck that runs black huge amounts of recursion from the graveyard. It's one of those cards that's so powerful it has a built-in self-exile clause, but I think that's a good thing. Could you imagine playing EDH where Yawgmoth's Will does not exile itself and you're able to bounce it back to your hand with cards like Arcanomancer or Mystic Retrieval? Ugh, I don't want to live in that world. Well gang, that was my top 10 EDH favorite black sorcery spells. Did you agree or did you disagree? Were there any cards you would consider in your personal top 10 list for these kind of cards? Please let me know in the comments below. Please be sure to tune in every Monday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed video, with a second video popping up sometime during the week. You can also check me out on Twitter at MTGMudsta, and sometimes I'll be streaming on Twitch at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in part by support from my Patreons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please visit the link below or in the About section. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe.